Dannie-Lu, we've spoken about creativity several times previously, and this year the theme is presence, emergence, and impact. And being
Mm.
a creative person, and I know that I've seen at least one of your TED Talks. Have you done one or more than one TED Talk?
I've done one. I was scheduled to do one in September, but that's not happening now for obvious reasons. So hopefully there'll be one later this year or early 2021. I'm hoping that will get pushed.
Well, let me start with that then. You know, your presence on stage as a TED speaker compared with the virtual presence, you know, like this year, you haven't been able to do a presentation, a TED presentation in front of a live audience, but the online, you know, a lot of conferences, my conference has always been online in any case, but a lot of people like the TED, I've seen interviews being done with Malala Yousaf that was supposed to have happened in real life, but they did an interview online with her, a TED interview. So how is our presence in the virtual space different to our presence on a live stage?
Ooh, it's a good question. I mean, it is very different. For me personally, I prefer the live space without a doubt. There's something about having living, breathing human beings that you can, you know, feel energetically in the room that gives a lot in terms of creativity and inspiration. There's an element of that that does still transcend through, you know, the Zooms, the Skypes, you know, the online stuff. But I feel less than what is live. It's more difficult, not just for the person speaking to stay present, but I think also for those listening and being on the receiving end, because it's a more two-dimensional version of what we would ordinarily have as a multi-dimensional figure in front of us. And that really impacts our senses.
I suppose when somebody's on stage, we can sense, as you say, their energy, their presence through their energy, and we can feel those who've got loads of energy and those who've got less energy than others. Whereas online, in a virtual space, the energy of everyone seems to be more or less the same.
Yeah, it does. That's true. And often, you know, simple things like we're sitting down, you know, if we're up on a stage, we're standing, we're moving, there's a very different thing happening biologically and neurologically that, you know, compared to sitting down and looking at a screen. So there's all of that stuff as well. And we lose the communication that we, you know, that unconscious communication that we read from that emotional core, you know, between the sort of the neck and the tops of the legs. We lose most of that when we're talking like this. So we are more limited for sure in terms of presence.
And in a sense, it can be a benefit for some people who don't like to, you know, maybe they're more introvert. They don't like to be up in front of 1,000 people, whereas they're willing to face a camera.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are benefits, you know, as with everything has its pros and everything has its cons. And the benefits are usually that we are more on a time restriction, which can be quite good in terms of keeping people focused and on point. There's more opportunity to have notes around you or prompts around you if that's what you need. If you are someone, as you say, who feels a bit more nervous getting up there, then this online presence allows something different. And yeah, it is very much down to type. But I do think we lose a lot. I'm very excited to be back in the room. I've really missed that. Delivering workshops and working with clients as well in collaboration, I found way more challenging being in my living space the entire time. And I guess that's the other thing, the lack of change of environment for all of us is sometimes a challenge as well.
And when you're on stage, you have a persona. That persona sometimes makes a person seem larger than life. Whereas here we're seeing you in your own living space, and this is more perhaps like the real you rather than that person who is on the stage acting.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also you get to see people's living rooms, don't you? You get to see their space and their, you know, like your bookcase, my guitar, my plants, you know, it's like this is a real human being. So on that level, you know, in terms of connection, that lends itself to something that's more tangible, arguably.
And then let's talk about emergence then. So emergence is things that arise that are unplanned, unforeseen, not predicted. So in the think about that last TED talk that you did. What emerged as a result of your presence in that space and having done that, you know, because you were
Mm,
present in real time, but that
mm,
TED talk was available a long time after you'd actually delivered it in real time. So that
yeah,
presence is not simply transient. It, you know, your presence is for as long as they continue to have it on YouTube or, you know,
yeah.
or on their websites or whatever. So what was the emergence from that presence?
And a lot, in fact. It lent itself to, you know, from as simple as coming off stage that day and talking to people afterwards who'd been in the audience who'd resonated with some of the content or wanted to talk to me about certain things that had come up during that talk. That then started off and seeded, as these things do, these kind of ripples and flows of other stuff. So that then led to you know, workshops, further studies, the emergence of the creative wavelengths, which then became obviously the antidote to that topic that was raised on that TED stage back then. And of course, the fact that you can send it to people, it gives them that's a real snapshot of who you are and what you're about, and they get a sense of you really quickly. And of course, that there is some credibility that goes with being able to send a link to a TED talk to somebody. Oh, that person's published, they've done a TED talk. It immediately gives you a credibility, which then allows a lot of other stuff to happen. So I think the emergence from that's been massive, in fact, directly and indirectly.
And I suppose that in turn has made an impact on your presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Impact on presence and an impact on the topic. You know, it's already that topic. By sending that TED talk, it's almost like it's a shorthand to, well, this is where we start from. It covers a lot of ground and it gives you a starting platform that, had you not had that shorthand, had I not had that shorthand or that shortcut, might have taken a long time to then do that work and describe where I was coming from. Whereas that 13-minute talk is like, okay, watch this and then we can start from there.
And it requires a very different mindset. Like, you know, think back to before you did that TED talk. If you had
Mm,
thought to yourself, well, this is my business plan, this is my business strategy, you know, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the outcome that I'm looking for
mm,
in a year's time.
mm.
And but with emergence, we need a very different mindset than that linear one, because with emergence, it's like we just don't know what's going to happen.
We don't, and I think this year's been it's such a great example of that, isn't it? Nobody predicted what was going to happen. We still don't really know what's going to happen. So whilst I think it's good to have a bit of a plan or an aim, the agility and the openness to go, okay, well, that's where I'd like to go, but I'm open to wherever, is absolutely paramount when it comes to creativity and impact.
Yeah, the reason I'm smiling is because I hear agility so often these days.
Yeah.
You know, it like say 5 years ago, that word agility, like businesses have to be agile. People
Mm.
weren't saying that as much. But now this year, I keep hearing it. You know, it's like we have to be agile. And
Yeah, we do, and we do, and it's been something that I know those of us in the creative space have talked about that, and maybe not even used that word, but I mean, I used to use flexible ground as a, you know, which is agile has kind of replaced that terminology as recognizable and what people know what you're talking about. And those of us who've always been in the creative space have always been aware of the fact that you have to move and respond. But I'm really pleased that people are realizing that all businesses need to do that because of the world we're in now. It is so unpredictable and unexpected and ambiguous, and all that whole VUCA piece, you know, is very much where we're at.
yeah, and things like security, we can say goodbye to that. No.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's an interesting one, isn't it? When you look at the sort of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid, because security is right at the bottom, and actually now we haven't got that. It's like, where does the top of that pyramid land now? That's definitely been something on my radar. Where do we go with that now? And surely we have to not throw that out. Can we still get that without the security, or does security just have to be redefined?
Well, perhaps resilience is the new kind of security. It's like if we focus on being resilient, being able to bounce back, you know, knowing that that's where our security lies, is in our resilience.
Yes, which is internal actually rather than external, which is quite nice because we have much more control over that, in fact. But it's very different, isn't it? It's a very different thing from what we've experienced historically.
Absolutely. Yeah, and creatives are often associated with being able to make things happen. And
Yeah.
so combine that ability to make things happen with a resilience and agility and flexibility and all of these things. And it's like, well, you know, whatever life throws at us, we do have the resources to be able to respond.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to trust in that, even when things feel tough, is key. I've definitely had that conversation with myself over the last 6 months of, you know, trust in the things you just talked about, your creativity, your resilience, your ability to innovate, your ability to respond, to read what's happening, respond accordingly. It's, you know, to tune out of the fear, you know, the fear narrative, and be trusting in one's own abilities is very important for creativity to flourish, because when we're in fear, creativity can't flourish.
That's true. And over the last few years, you know, there's been so much research, and I think it was the Forbes report. They said creativity was going to be one of the top 3 skills that employers look for. And I think the pandemic has really demonstrated why creativity.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because there was definitely a time, and I think we might have talked about that last time, where people were a little wary of creativity and investing in it, and kind of, oh, I'm not sure, is that a waste of money? And I had clients who at one point said to me, oh, we're not going to commission anything with creativity in the title, which was, you know, heartbreaking for someone who's a creative. But that definitely has shifted in terms of people going, oh, actually, oh, maybe we got this wrong. And I've had conversations with people recently about the, you know, recognize, going back to the polymath mentality of the science of art and the art of science, and how they have to sit together. We can't separate the two. Otherwise it's a disaster.
Yeah. And I suppose, you know, people who say we don't want to fund anything with creativity is simply a linguistic thing. It's because the interpretation of creativity is like they might think it's to do with arts, you know, and their organization's got nothing, you know, they're not funding arts. But if you redefine it and say, well, no, creativity is about innovation, it's about you know, so it's a linguistic thing. I think people define creativity in so many different ways. But you, a creative person, how do you, you know, I'm sure that your presence in an organization serves as a catalyst for creativity to occur around you. So you, the ideas may not come through you, but your presence means that ideas emerge from others, and you stimulate ideas, or you ask questions that cause ideas to emerge.
Yeah, I think so. And also the permission for people when, you know, I think when people are in an environment where creativity may not be as valued, or it may not be an understanding around it, as you've just said, you know, maybe innovation but not creativity. And even though to me they sit completely together, they don't always in other people's brains. But if I'm there as someone who is the creative, it almost gives them an internal permission to go there for themselves and access part of themselves they might ordinarily chop off or shut down, or, you know, kind of be cautious around. They get that permission, which is, it's great if you can give someone that permission.
And on the other hand, you know, we've talked about the importance of creativity, and yet we know from listening to the news that a lot of the creative industry, that's an industry that's suffering the most.
Hugely. Yeah, it really is. And I know we've had a rescue package, which was very, very welcome. I'm not sure how far that's, you know, going to stretch. But the one thing that I've said, and I've said it to a lot of my creative friends who are, you know, actors, musicians, etc., who solely make their income in that way, is the one thing about creative people is they'll always find a way to make it work for them. And what's been really lovely has, you know, I went to see Eddie Izzard read from memory Great Expectations on a rooftop in Bexhill the other night, you know, and it was socially distanced, and it's like sitting listening to stories again. I've seen a rehearsed reading open air in a park, you know, there's music on the pier, socially distanced, and it's like, okay, this is different from what we know, but the one thing about creativity is it will always find a way despite the landscape, and that's a really amazing thing.
Yeah, that's so true. I do remember seeing these ballerinas doing their ballets in their kitchens using
yeah, and that's it. What comes from that, I guess, it's back to emergence, because then what emerges from that is still to be seen, but there's some beautiful things, you know, and people singing, people doing group singing on Zoom, which I didn't think was possible because of the sound limitations, but they've managed to do it. It's incredible.
Yeah. So what's emerged is new expressions of creativity.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that thing of where we've got, you know, tightness and restriction, the creativity has to find it, it has to bend and flex back to flex, right? Like to get its way through. And it always does. And I know things like budget cuts and things like budget squeezes, actually often the strongest creativity comes out of that. It's not always comfortable, but what can emerge from that is usually amazing.
Yeah. So, you know, following on from this pandemic, let's say next year, hopefully we'll be talking again, we'll be having a creativity conversation again in a year's time. What do you foresee to be the impact on our presence? Because in a way, we are creating our futures, aren't we? You know, like that's the emergence. We just don't know what the following year is going to bring, but we have to be ready to respond to it with resilience, and it will leave an impact. It will reshape the way we work, the way we communicate with our families, with our friends. So in a year's time, that the emergent future, what impact do you think it will have on our presence now? So in what way do we need to be present to create this emergent future?
To pay attention always. I would say to always pay attention, and to be careful when one gets triggered by, oh, I don't like that, I don't want that, which is very easy to do. I definitely go there. But to be aware of, okay, well, that's where it is. What can we do from that? How can we respond to that? And keeping that flex, that agility, and being open, and staying in a bit of a trusting mindset of whatever comes up, I can work with it. I've got the skills. We've all got the skills to be able to innovate and create as a response to that. And as long as we're paying attention and responding, you know, as we're tuned into it, then we can trust that the right thing will come out.
Okay. And now focusing on your work then with the wavelengths. What has emerged over the last few years around that?
It's some quite big stuff, actually. So I've been talking to Said Business School in Oxford. We've had some really interesting conversations about what is creativity and how do we measure it. So the measurements around creativity has been a big conversation this year, and how organizations tend to, when they measure creativity or innovation, depending on how they refer to it, it tends to be a return of investment. And the conversation that we've been having, which we're still amidst, and we don't have massive answers yet, although we have a few theories, is, you know, can we rely on finance to measure creativity? And I would say no, absolutely not. That's not a measure of creativity. What a measure of creativity is how engaged are people. And so we had a really interesting kind of theoretical conversation around bringing in AI, which can sometimes be perceived as a threat to creativity, but actually utilizing it to show the engagement. How engaged are people? How in the process are they? And you know, how, depending on how in the process people are, that's a good measurement of creativity, which is then where, if we can get people focusing in the process, then we can access the wavelengths in a deeper way. So that's where we're at with the creative wavelengths conversation, and looking at taking it into remote working as well, which has become a massive thing that's emerged, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, from this situation, way more remote working.
That's another example about how we define creativity. So the finance person will define creativity in financial terms, and the person who is like yourself, more interested in the well-being, but you're not funding it. You know, so your definition of creativity is from your point of view, but not the investor's point of view.
Yes, that's it. That's true. Yes. And I guess it's having to have that conversation so that it sits with everybody.
Yes.
Where's the value, and what is value to you? I mean, one of the wavelengths addresses that, because I have a wavelength called charge and am, and it's about there's always a charge, hence, you know, finance. There's also an amplifier. What else does that give you? And that both have to exist for something to be worthwhile. And I think that applies to everything.
Yeah. And when we think about the impact, so the impact that the investors are looking for is the financial impact. The impact that you're looking for is the well-being impact. What about people who are actually involved? You know, the participants. What do you think is the impact that they're looking for?
Well, depends on them, obviously, because we all have different things that we're looking for. But usually it's quality of what they get, being able to access their creative muscles and get their ideas, get to flow is often a thing. And, you know, you mentioned the wellbeing thing. That is also a thing for the participants. Quite often we spend like hour-long Zoom meetings or 2-hour-long Zoom meetings, for example. And actually what is usually more effective is a, you know, 30-minute focused piece where we're going into something more deeply rather than getting distracted off. So for them, it's the not getting the burnout or the overwhelm by meetings that are too long, that go on or go off on tangents. It's about staying on track. And that's definitely with the wavelengths, that's something that's come out, is they love how specific and how much time they save. An example actually is I worked with a Parisian screenwriter this year, and she was really struggling. She was like, I've got writer's block, can you help me? And I said, look, we can jump on a call. And in 25 minutes, I was able to diagnose using 3 wavelengths. And the next week she said, I finished my first draft. Thank you so much. And I was like, wow, I didn't even expect it to be that quick. Mm-hmm. So there's something about the efficiency, which I think is important for those who participate.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I suppose some people get into that state through meditating.
Yeah. It's creating space, isn't it? It's a big one on this, like creating the headspace, even if it's just 5 minutes of stillness, which a lot of people don't give themselves the permission to have. And I'm a big one on just stop doing for 5 minutes. And people can get very restless, and it's like, just let that 5 minutes, because what that obviously gives us is headspace. The minute we have space, we can get creative ideas in.
Absolutely. And I think the pandemic has given us an opportunity for that headspace through people being furloughed, even sadly from people being unemployed. It's forced them to take that space.
Yeah.
Forced them to take time out for themselves.
Absolutely. And to recognize the importance of it. I think everyone's recognized the importance of just stopping for a while, you know, and taking a step back. In terms of mental health and well-being, which I know is like the top of the priority list now through this pandemic, that has been absolutely a huge silver lining from it all.
And once we slow down, you know, nature thrives, doesn't it? You know, we saw even just in the first weeks, nature just, you know, blossomed.
It did. And that's such a nice reminder in terms of, you know, we don't have to constantly be pushing at them. Sometimes it's, you know, a little push, but then sometimes it's the stand back and the let go where the thing emerges. And it's worth remembering that for all of us. I have to remember that too. Sometimes just stop pushing, let it breathe, let the work breathe, let you breathe. And what comes up is usually something will come into that space, which is the nugget or the absolute light bulb where you know where to go next.
Like in an emergent conversation, which hasn't been planned with specific questions. Sometimes people say to me, can you give me a list of questions that you're going to ask me? And I rarely do that, because whenever I've done that, they give me speeches.
Yeah, and it's prepared, which has a value, but there is something lovely about the free flow. And yeah, as you say, the emergent conversation, you don't know where it's going to go.
Excellent. So to summarize then, for you, presence, emergence and impact over the next year, how do you anticipate it will unfold?
Presence being paramount, as I said before, you have to be there, even if we feel scared or uncertain. You know, showing up, paying attention. You know, in terms of emergence, again, pay attention, respond, trust in your resources to respond to that appropriately or innovatively or creatively. And impact remains to be seen, but I always still hold on to that thing of, you know, everything happens for a reason and everything will find its way ultimately. And my hope is for creativity that we are going to recognise more than ever the importance of it and bring it much more centre stage.
Great. And I suppose ultimately we have to choose what we want to create, you know? It's that choice, isn't it? You know, like we can create, like if we're pessimistic, we can create all sorts of negative things. And but if we choose to, you know, earlier we were talking about emergence can be both good and bad. And if we choose to pour our energy onto the desirable things, emerge, then
Yeah.
it's the choice to make, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot to be said for that. And I think also to trust, even if something emerges where you initially might react and think it's not good, is again that trust piece, because it's usually taking you somewhere. It's just that the journey might be a little bumpier, but we're normally going somewhere great, and holding that in the forefront. Key.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because that could be the stepping stone, that could be the obstacle that needs, on the other side of that obstacle is, you know, what you were aiming for.
Yeah, that's the shift. That's the shift piece. Yeah.
Okay, Dannie-Lu, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to
Likewise.
speaking to you again very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye for now.
Take care. Bye bye.